You're listening to 9394, a music podcast with Travis Roy. Thank you for joining me on my very first episode. Why am I doing an entire podcast devoted to albums released in the years 1993 and 1994? You probably know the answer to that question if you're listening to this podcast right now. And who am I? I am just some dude. I'm from Michigan. I was born in 1980, so that means in the years of 93 and 94, I was a very crucial age between, the latter half of 12 and the early half of 14. So a pretty impressionable and important time in my life. And I was really fortunate to be exposed to so much great music, primarily through a lot of the same sources that I won't even mention here because I will mention them numerous times, likely ahead on the show. And who am I speaking with? I'm speaking with people just like me, ordinary people just like you. I'm not trying to find industry insiders, just other people who love these albums and want to talk about them.
Got struck by the first volley of the war in the core.
So what album am I talking about first? Well, when I had the idea to do this podcast, Pavement's 1994 album, Crooked Rain was at the top of the list of albums that I was interested in talking about. And fortunately for me, my good friend Chris Deary reached out and volunteered to talk about that album with me on this show. Chris is a good friend of mine who I've known for many years. We met at an event that we'll talk about called The Feast, which we do yearly and get together with a bunch of old friends of ours. We've been doing it for 25 years or so, just spending a weekend together, getting loaded, listening to music. A lot of these albums that we'll be talking about. And so Chris and I are about now to talk about Pavement's Crooked Rain.
Dad, they broke me.
there he is.
What's up, my friend?
Hey, buddy.
How are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm good.
Good to see you.
Yeah, you as well, man.
Thanks for volunteering to come on this and to be first even.
Well, yeah. I've been on podcasts before. I knew you weren't going to do it with some newbie first. So
it's not your first rodeo.
Exactly. No, once I saw that idea, I was like, I got to get a record in there immediately before someone scoops it up.
and you picked one of the best possible albums from the era.
Yeah, I think so.
One of the ones that definitely was like when I thought of the idea of the podcast, I'm like, this is like top of my list,
Yeah, so this is a good one to start with. Got it right here.
Look, on vinyl. Look at that.
Yeah, in 2020, my wife got me a record player, and it was like one of the first records I got. So it's a bad addiction we have going with records.
Hey, I got a few. I don't have that one. I did get the LA's Desert Origins, the CD version. You know what I'm talking about, like that double CD when they released all those double CDs versions of it, and it's like 30 songs, and you're like, whoa, okay, I got like alternate versions of everything and like everything from the era. It's like, all right, sit down for 4 hours and listen to Pavement.
Yeah, I was watching a lot of like old Stephen Malkmus interviews and stuff like that. There's some really funny ones out there.
Yeah, he was definitely someone who didn't seem like he wanted the fame or like he was interested in that level of attention at all. So how do you and I know each other? Let's start there.
How do we know each other? Boy, I guess it would probably be The Feast, right?
Through The Feast, of course.
Through The Feast, I got connected with some Heartland guys when I went to Western Michigan University for a short bit. And 2006, I moved to Ann Arbor and moved in with James Andrews and Govier, and The Feast was going to be there that year. And I remember Mike asked me if I could leave for the weekend because Mike, I kind of passerby with Mike several times over the years, but I wasn't really close with him. And then he like asked me to leave. And then like 2 days later, he felt really, really bad. He's like, well, I guess some of these guys, you could probably stick around. And I've been a part of it ever since.
And The Feast, of course, being a weekend long event that we do yearly where we just get together and don't necessarily eat, but we certainly drink. Well, I'm very glad that he felt that level of guilt, because I feel like it probably brought you and him closer. And it certainly, I wouldn't know you really. I mean, I met you through that, but we became friends like through The Feast and that yearly event and other things, of course.
Yeah, for sure. throw a bunch of trash in the trash, throw some food in the trash, and
Food in the trash.
listen to music and play some games and have a good time. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing that I've been able to be a part of it, and I'm certainly grateful.
For sure. I'm grateful that you could be a part of it too. So how did you first come to this album? Do you have recollections?
Yeah, so I mean, it comes out in 94, early 94. So
February 14th of 1994.
13 and a half. I'm about to turn 14 that summer. So I'm in 7th grade, and we're part of that generation of, we had a great alternative music station in Metro Detroit area, and
89X, CIMX,
baby. And then we're an MTV generation, so there was a lot of staying up late at night. And I think it was I saw the Cut Your Hair video on 120 Minutes.
Yep.
I still remember like staying up super late on weekends for 120 minutes. And when it was on commercial, I would go over to USA Up All Night, and they'd be playing some really stupid movies like Toxic Avenger and Porky's and
maybe Silk Stockings over on USA.
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Yeah.
Gilbert Gottfried. And yeah, so I saw the video and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And, I started getting into a lot of that music around, 92, 93, a lot of, the grunge, the Pearl Jams and Nirvanas. And yeah, so that's kind of how I connected with this band. And they just seem so different from like everything that was out in like, true kind of indie fashion.
Yeah. You brought up two things that are going to be recurring themes on this show, most certainly, which is 120 Minutes and 89X, the radio station out this way, because they right around the same time in my life. Yeah. I mean, I was lucky to have older siblings that turned me on to some cool stuff as a kid.
Yeah,
and one of the things that, we're lucky for that. And one of the things that they also turned me on to was like 89X. So I was listening to 89X when I was pretty young, but definitely 120 Minutes. R.I.P. Louis Largent, who passed recently. He was like the main guy about the time this came out, and I think he actually was in charge of programming too. So big impact, I think, on a lot of people's lives that maybe he doesn't get credit for. But yeah, this video like blew me away, and I remember Keith Coomer bought this album on cassette and did not like it, and so on the during lunch in 8th grade, he sold it to me, the cassette, for $8. I was like, fuck yeah.
Yeah, it's a steal. You still have it?
I still have that very cassette.
Amazing.
And it still plays mostly okay. It's a little warbly at this point. So what would you say, if you had to like put a gun to your head, what's like the best song or favorite song on this album for you?
Yeah, that's what's so interesting specifically about this album. For years, I liked their previous album, Slanted and Enchanted, a little bit more. And I would want to say in like probably the last 10, 15 years, I've moved towards Crooked Rain. But I think what I love so much about this band is, especially this album, is anyone that enjoys this album, they could have a different favorite song. Yeah. So like I have a list of like my 12 favorite songs from the album, but it could change from day to day.
There's 12 tracks on the album for those not paying attention.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's pretty interchangeable between like 6 songs, between Range Life, Gold Sounds. I really love Stop Breathing. Silence Kid and Cut Your Hair were kind of the two that I think maybe we heard on the radio more than any of them. And then, the album ender, Fillmore Jive, I've gotten so into over the last couple of years because it's a 6.5 minute just like build up, and it has this like almost like classic rock like solo in the middle of it, which is just like so neat. And it's such a unique band.
And their solos are always so like, I remember first hearing the word schlock rock to describe the phrase schlock rock. And because like their solos are so, I mean, that was one of the things I always liked about them. They sounded like anybody could do it in a way, but only they could do it together, right? Like only they could be Pavement. And I feel like if you like change any member, it's not going to be quite right. But it also, I remember being particularly inspired. Like I've never been much of a musician, but I played bass in a few bands, and I was like really pulled on Mark Eibel because I was like, well, he does stuff that's like really basic, but also like it carries everything. It's always like the spine for the songs in a real strong way. Yeah, they had such a unique sound. Gold Sounds for me was probably the one that hit me the most. But you're right, like it's almost every song on here is a banger, and even the ones that like I'm maybe less into, say, like Hit the Plane Down. I'm hardly mad when it comes on.
Yeah, I think it's probably like Hit the Plane Down and Heaven is a Truck. Those two don't hit me as much. I think both of those are really hard to decipher the lyrics. And I think that's also what makes this band so unique is like the storytelling of Stephen Malkmus is just all over the place. And you don't really know what he's going for. Going back to Louis Largent and, in 95, he had Pavement on. It was just Bob and Stephen. And it's a really awkward interview because he keeps pushing this thing towards them as like, oh, you guys write a lot about the music industry and how you guys don't want to be big and all this. And they're just kind of like laughing at him and kind of joking around.
Pressure making this record, coming off your relative largeness after the first album. Your reputation was so huge after that album. You have a lot to live up to.
Not really.
Are you going to talk?
We didn't feel the pressure, not severely or anything like that. There was kind of a large gap there, so.
Hey, Steven, are you going to talk?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure that.
Do you feel any pressure?
No. It's pressure can be good sometimes. I mean, people pay tons of money for expensive massages.
Stephen doesn't say almost a word through the whole interview,
that.
and it's mostly Bob who, if you don't know Bob, he's kind of like the indie rock Flavor Flav. He's like the hype man for the band because he's like he just sits there and just plays that one like snare drum, and then he's always like hollering into the mic something funny. And that's another thing. Like so many of these songs, like at the end of songs, you just get these really odd tones and like sounds in the background, and some of it could be just like hollering or chanting, and so a lot of it's Bob.
That makes sense. And the album has such a lively feel to it, like such a like cohesive feel, even though it's chaotic. And I think that's partly because a lot of that kind of raucous yelling and playing that they're doing, and that they also include stuff like we just mentioned at the Hit the Plane Down, like how that ends and you hear all this like background experimentation and that kind of stuff. And that kind of filters in throughout the album, but in some places more obvious than others. Do you have specific memories maybe tied to this album? Anything stands out to you like in your personal life that connects you to this album?
I don't think there's anything that really connects me to it. I think there was a large time in high school where I really didn't listen to it very much, and I kind of rediscovered it in college. And I think the biggest connection that a lot of people from our generation that were born, late 70s to early 80s, I think the big connection is, when this band came out, they looked like just like us. It's like they're the coolest guys in the room, but they don't care that they're the coolest guys in the room. They're like thrift shop guys. Everything they bought was probably at a thrift shop to wear, and they talk about skating and winter tees, and
they're like lanky or kind of floppy or pudgy, like depending on the dude, and just kind of just regular guys. I did the same thing as you, where I kind of tuned out on them for a long time until I got back into college. Like in my early teens, I was really into the indie rock, and then I got into like punk rock and hardcore and all this stuff later on that kind of like got myopic in my listening tastes. But Crooked Rain was one of those albums that I would just always return to. I never quite left it alone completely, but I didn't really dig into anything else of theirs. Slanted and Enchanted, I remember listening to that. I got into this first and then went retroactively back to Slanted and Enchanted, which was a little bit weird because right about the time I did that, I walked into my 8th grade class and my 8th grade teacher, Mr. Taylor, was playing the album playing Slanted and Enchanted when I walked in.
Amazing.
But he was a very cool guy. So yes, it was. Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely something that it's like a touchstone to that time and place and like that part of my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And, I think the variety on the album, and you can like see some of their like bands that had influenced them before, you hear a lot of like early REM, you get a little bit of Sonic Youth in there. I think the joke that I've always heard about Range Life is that it should have been an Eagles song because it's got that kind of like country twang at the start. And, that's a really neat song as well. And
it is.
Yeah. Like just some of those influence they have. I mean, even a song like Unfair, when he's like screaming at the end of it, like, get a lot of like Kurt Cobain vibes from like Aneurysm in it, which is like, as I was listening to this over the last few days, I'm like, man, there's so many like crazy influence, like Guided by Voices. Like if you just took a Guided by Voices song and extended times 10, because all their songs are 45 seconds long.
Right. Yeah, those are good points. I feel like it's not quite like noise rock, you know what I mean? But it's just kind of crazy enough to do that, but also be reined in. But as far as their influences go, I feel like they must have been compared to REM a lot, because I definitely have read that in quite a few, like a messier REM, which may have led to them doing Unseen Power of the Picket Fence, which was on No Alternative, which I think was actually 94, I want to say.
Yeah.
Where they, that's just like a love letter to REM, but still, like it's a love letter to REM, but it's also kind of talking about the Civil War.
Hey, sir! Hey, sir!
Which kind of gets back to your earlier point about Malcolmus's songwriting. Like his stuff would be 3 or 4 things at once. Like, hey, I'm going to have a song about playing tennis and masturbation.
Stop breathing.
Right. Like I was just kind of just wed these two completely unrelated things together. And yet it's going to make total sense. But yeah, I never really got the sense that there's like a narrative structure to their songs for the most part.
No, not at all. I mean, Stop Breathing is a song that is like a very, very slow, like kind of ballady song that gives me like all these like influence from like other groups. And then it's like at the 2:17 mark, it just stops. And then it goes into this just like interlude of like all these different instruments going in. And then they don't even say anything the rest of the song. So it's like that easily could have been like a 4-minute ballad, but like he sings it so slow, but to me it doesn't seem like a slow song because of like how he does it. And I think it's genius.
I agree. It's one of my early favorites from the album, and it's probably, I mean, these days I'd say Gold Sounds, but if I had to pick a favorite, but Stop Breathing's always been really high up there on that short list. Did you mistakenly think that Silence Kid was called Silence Kit for like 10, 15 years like I did?
Well, that's good. That's what it said on my CD.
What it fucking said. That's what it fucking said, man.
It's so wild to think about it. And then like you look at the vinyl right here, Silence Kit. It's right there.
Yeah. But you go like on Spotify or something, it's like, hey, wait a minute. Who's this kid? I remember like learning that back in the day and be like, no, I think you're mistaken. It's Kit. It's a song about a drum kit, like a quiet drum kit. So you're still a pretty regular listener to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have Slanted, Enchanted, and Crooked Rain on vinyl, and Crooked Rain has definitely taken the crown in this household for listening. It's and those first 4 songs that end with Cut Your Hair is just like, what an amazing beginning to an album.
Yeah.
And then, you have a couple more songs, then you get to the jazz breakdown, you get to 5 - 4 = unity, which is just like, that just gets thrown on an album. And I absolutely love that part of the album because it's all over the place. It's almost like they took 6 or 7 different genres and put it all in one part of the album. And it's that one song that's like 2.5 minutes.
Yeah. One of the things I always think is so cool about albums as opposed to just single songs is that you get the sense of someone being in the studio and like re-recording these multiple versions, playing with it, trying to find the right thing. Like, have you ever heard the version of that with vocals?
No.
It's the shouting, it's the shouting, it's the shouting, it's the Dutchman shout.
Yeah, it's on LA's Desert Origins. It kind of works, but it totally makes sense why they literally just released that exact same thing just without the vocals.
Yeah.
But they definitely, it seems to me like there's stuff that they, and this is speculation, but it seems like there's some stuff that they came in with a good sense of like, this is what we're doing. And there's some stuff that was maybe kind of jamming and like making it up as they went along, maybe sort of like that. Again, that's speculation, but it comes across. And that maybe that's what is one of the things that's always been so great about them and why to me they've seen representative about that time period in the genre, that like inchoate genre of alternative or indie, and that it always seemed like it was being made up on the fly. Like this album just feels like it's like spontaneously bursting into existence as you're listening to it.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's back to your point where it's like, could any other band put this out? It seems like there's no egos within the band and they just
Right.
meld together so well. I mean, it's pretty much, I mean, obviously they took a long break and hiatus and, got back together this past year and a half and have toured a couple times.
Well, they got back together in 2010 too, because I saw them then.
Yeah.
I saw them in Toronto and it was incredible. Like they were a band like, I mean, like I remember I was in a band that I had a lyric in one of the songs that was like, if everyone writes them a nice letter, maybe they'll get back, maybe Pavement will get back together. And I actually wrote them like an actual letter and mailed it to the fucking address that was still on the inside cover of Crooked Rain, like to send fan mail to. They listened because after like 7 or 8 years, they actually did get back together.
That's
and
so
seeing them
funny.
live, man. I mean, I'd had like dreams, literally like 2 or 3 dreams in my life about like, what if I saw Pavement live? And I got to see him, and it was like front row, and it was just magic. It was really incredible.
Yeah, and that's crazy to think that was 13 years ago. I mean, they came to Detroit last fall, and I just didn't have the opportunity to go see him, and I really feel like I dropped the ball on that. And I wonder, I want to ask you, like, if they had stuck together, and I think they did 3 albums after this. What would they have been if they would have stuck together, specifically through like the late 2000s or even like mid 2000s, when really a lot of kind of the garage band indie rock stuff started like really hitting in the mainstream again?
That's a good question. I mean, you'd said earlier that there didn't really seem to be egos in the band. I feel like there's not egos in the sound of the band, but I always kind of got the feeling that Malcolmus maybe had a little bit of an ego, at least on some things that I heard. Like, I know that Terror Twilight, their last like proper album, from what I understand, that was almost all Malcolmus's songwriting, and like he was kind of going full J Mascis and like, no, I'm doing this.
Yeah, I could see that.
And then after they broke up, he did Steve Malkmus and the Jicks, or just Steve Malkmus. So I feel like a lot of it would have gone that direction, which was, I don't know if you've listened to that stuff much. I've listened to it off and on, his solo stuff, and it always kind of felt like the adult contemporary version of Pavement. You know what I mean? Just like very, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was much more polished and like accessible, I think.
Yeah. I listen to it, here and there, but it's similar to, the Pavement records after Crooked Rain. I mean, Wowie Zowie has 18 songs on it, and it's all over the place.
Yeah.
And some of it can be, similar to, what's the one after that? Brighten the Corners.
Yeah, Brighten the Corners.
And then
Terror Twilight.
It's kind of all over the place, and some of the songs are really hard to get through, and then some of them are really good. But I don't think they just don't have the cohesiveness within like the album as they have on the first 2.
It does really feel like, and I love all those albums. I love Brighten the Corners and I love Wowie Zowie. Terror Twilight's never really grabbed me. There's a couple ones on there, but a lot of times, in my opinion, the first album or 2 is usually the superior album of bands, because that's when they're like still finding their sound and they haven't like fallen into regurgitating themselves, and they're still like experimenting, and it makes sense that would be their prime time for that. Do you have other things you wanted to touch on?
I mean, I think what I love about them is, and it's within a lot of their lyrics, is like, we had this huge shift, obviously, in the late 90s or in the late 80s coming into the 90s. And, Slanted Enchanted is 91. And then like really that grunge, era kind of hits. And I think, what they're really good at doing is talking about how like the music industry around them is like kind of shit. But like they also don't want to be these like big purveyors of like saving music as well. And it's similar to the Louis Largent interview where he's like, you guys aren't interested in having success, and he's like, well, success in whose eyes? Your eyes, the mainstream eyes. And they talk about in several of their songs of labels coming in and ruining bands, and it's like, hey, we go to see this band and I don't really care what they say, because they're just being pushed out by some record company. And, it's why they never, really got on with a big record company. They were with Matador, and I know there was like a distribution deal with Atlantic that was able to get their albums more out to people, but like they wanted to do it all on their own.
Yeah. Attention and fame is a career instead of like song making. which is really funny. And also like they're kind of brazen digging at other acts and Range Life in particular, right? Like Stone Temple Pilots and Smashing Pumpkins always seem like it's like is this like a rap feud? Is this a West Coast thing? Like what's happening? Of course they're from Georgia. But yeah, that's a good point. I think that it must have been a weird time to pop because a lot of bands were popping that 2-3 years earlier would have gotten very little attention, but because Nirvana and Pearl Jam had done so well and everyone was kind of like holding up Kurt Cobain in particular, I imagine to look at what those guys were going through and being like, well, I don't want fuck all to do with that. I want to get paid to, I want to make a living. I want to tour. I want people to listen to my music. But I mean, I'm sure that there were people trying to call Pavement grunge because that's what they were just trying to call everything at that time.
Yeah, of course. And I think what actually helped Pavement out is that, in 94, obviously, this is why you're doing the show, is there's so many amazing albums that come out, but so many albums from a lot of different genres. And I think that's what like we were really lucky to have by being that MTV generation and that 89X generation, is that an album like Jeff Buckley's Grace and then Soundgarden's Super Unknown can come out in the same year, and you can own both of those. You could have Portishead's Dummy, or you could have Bad Religion, Stranger Than Fiction. It's kind of all over the place in genres, which was really helpful.
Yeah.
And then you get to like 96 through like 99, and like what you start hearing on the radio really gets like kind of out of control, where like everybody's trying to do what came in 93, 94, 95, and then it just gets a lot of like retread and just kind of gets boring.
Yeah, I feel like a point I will probably reiterate on this show a few times is that this was kind of towards the last gasp of music bubbling up and becoming popular and like people responding to it, as opposed to it kind of being force fed to them. Not that that hadn't been going on in the record industry for a long time, that kind of force feeding, but the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996, which made it so that companies like Clear Channel could own 30% of radio stations in any given market. I remember like around 96 is when I stopped listening to the radio, because I'm like, okay, they're playing the same Green Day song 4 times per hour. Like, what the fuck? And if it wasn't like that or Blink-182, then it was new country or rap. And now it's just new country or rap pretty much. So I feel like the part of the reason that the era is so important is not just because it was like this explosion of creative music that hit a lot of people like us in a really key point in our life, but it was also seemingly the last, not again, like plenty of other good bands that come out since then, but like you really had to seek it out. Whereas back then you could just kind of exist and it would find you, even if you weren't looking that hard.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why we got into all of these bands and ended up getting so many of these albums. I mean, there's probably a list of 50 albums from 94 that I probably owned all of them because they were so accessible and they were all in your face. And it's, you work with kids, I work with kids, and I'm like amazed that like I will bring up certain groups that we grew up with and they have like no clue. And I'm like, you have the internet, you can find like live performances of all these people, but they don't know because none of that is like pushed in their face. When we were kids, we also grew up, obviously our parents or older brothers, we had classic rock. I mean, I got into like 80s new wave and The Cure and Depeche Mode from my older brother. And then once I'm 13, 14, like this is what's in the zeitgeist is like, the grunge and indie kind of, and punk era that starts coming out. So it's like, everything's so much more accessible for kids now, but they don't know. And I'm confused. Maybe I'm just playing old guy here.
Well, I mean, clearly this is a stay off my lawn moment, but no, I think you really hit something there, because every now and then I'll meet some younger people like, and it'll be like a teenager and they're listening to Talking Heads or something, like, fuck yeah, the kids are all right. Yeah. But most kids, you're right. Like what they're exposed to is pretty much going to be one of two genres for the most part. It's going to be like pop rap type stuff and country type stuff. Yep. I mean, all I listen to these days, other than the stuff from 93, 94, is like Tom Petty and Warren Zevon, because that's just like what I was exposed to as a little kid. So I kind of go back to it, maybe. I don't know. But like now, yeah, you're right. Like the kids today, I don't think they're that interested in our generations of music, which who could blame them? They do have their own stuff to get into, I guess.
Well, it's like I would love to show the Cut Your Hair video to a bunch of like high school kids and just see what they think of a guy sneezing out a cat and Bob drinking the hair solutions and Malcolmus gets a crown and a scepter. It's the most wild, simple video ever, but it like that's what like hooked me onto the band, was seeing that video. I'm like, wow, this is kind of wild, and it's a really catchy tune.
Very catchy. But you're right, like that was one of the advantages of videos at the time, was that you could see more than you could get, just more than the music. You get like you could get like a sense of what the guys in the band or the people in the band were like, you know, depending on how straightforward, like, is it sparks and slow motion and guitar solos? Well, you know, that kind of tells you one thing. Is it like guy sneezing a cat and or like Beck's video where they're like washing machines are fucking one another? Like, you know, if it's something creative like that, then it's like, okay, this tells me something about these people.
Yeah, you know, I see Stephen Malcolmus in that video, and it's like, hey, he's got the same hair that I got back in 93, 94. It's like kind of long, but not too long. And it's like parted a little bit on the side, kind of in the middle.
Right? He looked like so many people like that I was friends with, basically.
Yeah.
All right, I got one more question for you, unrelated to music. On the day that this album came out, February 14th, 1994, that evening on the network TV, stations, you had an option of a few choices. What would you have watched? Would you have watched ABC's Day One, which I've never I don't recall this at all. It was like a news show. So I'm going to guess that's a no.
No, I don't think so.
The CBS Winter Olympics.
Oh, God.
Fox was showing Point Break, the film. Or over at NBC, you could have watched Fresh Prince, followed by Blossom, Mad About You, and Wings. Where are you going?
Oh, man, that's tough. What was the third option? Oh, Point Break. I'm watching Point Break. I'm definitely watching Point Break. I gotta get my Keanu and Swayze pickup.
I wish I was as cool as you, because I knew you were going to say that, but I have to. I mean, like I'm currently watching Mad About You. I watched Wings before that. I had no idea that they once were back to back on the same network. I had no recollection of that. But late at night, I like to put on something stupid and mindless that I don't have to pay too much attention to. And so.
How is Mad About You holding up? Because I watched it in the 90s, probably the later seasons with Paul and Helen there. But how's it holding up?
A lot more sexual than I remembered it being. Like, I must have not gotten a lot of it because I was pretty young. Or I don't know what, but like, it's not like it's sexy. It's just like they're always like coming out of rooms with like sex hair or like there's literally an episode where like Helen Hunt starts to like go down on him and like Paul Reiser's like pushing her head down, then someone comes to the door. I'm like, what the fuck is this? Whoa, this is a lot more hardcore. I remember that must be why I was on at 9:30 p.m. or 9 o'clock.
After Blossom.
Yeah, see, they should have had Wings between Mad About You and Blossom. You didn't need Wings, and yeah, they fucked up the order there.
For sure.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for coming with me on this. I appreciate it. It's been fun talking about it with you. What song do you think that we should go out on?
I mean, it would probably be Gold Sounds.
Go back to those gold sounds and keep my advent to yourself, because
You know, you said that's one of your favorites. You know, if I make my top 3, Gold Sounds is always in there. And, you know, I think it's number 3 or 4 on the album. And it's just, I love that song.
I think it's actually 5 or 6. It's 7. It's later in there. It's like, I think it starts side 2.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah. But you're right. It's like the mountain in the middle of the album to kind of like come down from, instead of like having the big song at the end of the album, which you kind of do. So,
oh yeah, okay, yeah. It's after Unfair. It's right before the little jazz.
Yeah,
the little jazz break.
The jazz break. So we'll go out on that. Well, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate you coming on, man. And of course, tell us where people can find you if they want to listen to more of you talking.
Well, I will be so drunk in the August sun, just like Gold Sounds. You can find me at cdeary1999 on Twitter. I also do a fantasy baseball podcast called the Pallazzo Podcast, centered around fantasy baseball, obviously. And yeah, hopefully some people will be able to hear this and pick up this album.
That's right.
Cricket Rain. It's fantastic. One of my favorites from 1994. And Travis, thanks for having me on. Anytime you need someone to talk about music from 94, I'm your guy.
I will probably be tapping you again. Thanks, man.
You got it.
the album Crooked Rain, was named by someone outside of Pavement. It was suggested or something, but the album itself was produced by the band Pavement for Matador Records. And you can find Crooked Rain streaming on all major streaming platforms, as well as still available to purchase. And that was us talking about Crooked Rain. Thank you so much to Chris Deary. You are the best, dude. Thank you for coming on for my inaugural episode of this podcast. Very cool of you. It was wonderful talking with him and nerding out about this great album by this seminal indie rock band. And if you too want to talk about an album with me on this podcast, you could follow me on Facebook. Look at 9394 Podcast. Look up 9394 Podcast, or you can email me at 9394podcast@gmail.com. Or you could find my social media limited elsewhere, I guess. We can talk about maybe whatever album you want to that was released in 1993 or 1994. But one of the things I'm going to do at the end of every episode is mention a album that I'm personally looking for someone to talk about this album with. So while I'm open to whatever suggestions, and I will cover many genres, I'm also going to, at the end of these episodes, talk about the album that I'm hoping to find another fan to come on the show and talk about it with me. And for this episode, I am looking for someone to help me talk about the 1994 album released on K Records called These Are Not Fall Colors by the band Lync. I've always been pretty sure it's pronounced Lync. It's Lync. But if you're interested in talking about that album or really any other album from 1993 or 94, reach out to me. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate your support, and keep on keeping. And what kind of I need like an outro, and I don't know. Rock on, dude. Fuck. A music podcast with Travis Roy is a labor of love. It is not and never will be monetized. Please don't sue.